Mr. Chair?
Ready to go? Right. Call the Planning Board and Zoning Commission meeting for August 12th, 2026 to order. Can I have the roll call, please?
Roberts? Here. Gray?
Yep.
Tupin?
Yes.
Ecclesville? Boise?
Yeah.
Conley?
Here.
And Di Benedetto?
Here. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes from July 8th, 2026?
I move to approve the minutes of July 8th, 2026.
Is there any discussion, corrections?
Well, I had some questions on page 3, top of page 3. It says, and Historic Preservation Office. I think it was the Historic Preservation Officer review, not office. I don't think there's really an office.
Okay.
That was one. I also wanted to clarify that the city's potential cost on the Eagle's Nest was only 25% of the demolition cost, and that is correct. Okay.
Is that a correction?
No, it's correct in here. I just didn't recall that it was only 25% of the demolition cost. Those are the things that I questioned.
So, anybody else have any corrections? We just need to change the word to preservation officer.
Officer instead of office.
Okay. And we need a motion to amend the minutes to reflect that?
I would move to amend the minutes to reflect that one change.
Second?
I'll second.
Right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Right. Next on the agenda, I'll go over the agenda real quickly for those in the audience. We're going to have 2 opportunities for public comment. One is before we start new business, and then the second opportunity will be at the end of the meeting before we adjourn. So, moving on down the agenda, I have communications from board and council, Urban Renewal Agency, an update. Terry?
We last met on July 20th, and the substantial outcome was we'd had homework before that meeting to review the Red Lodge growth policy, the Urban Renewal District Plan, KSU report that we received back, and also I gave highlights of what was included in C3 North zoning. And prior to our meeting, Midge Cross, who's our co-chair, had developed a kind of a template summarizing all of those various documents, which we essentially referred back to that at the meeting. And the overall outcome of that was the document that I put in front of you all after meeting. And I should mention that the prior meeting we included Jeremy Fadness to talk about his recommendations and discuss form-based zoning and what does that look like for the Urban Renewal District portion of C3 North. And he gave us kind of a template to move to what that looks like and what we could do to move forward. And I think the beginning part of that template was looking at an overlay for the of the URD within C3 North, which is going to be, in essence, the recommendation that I put in front of you all to do that. And we feel that that's the best way to incorporate our goals in the URD portion of C3 North. And, you know, what the finer points of what that actually looks like, I guess that's something that we'll have to discuss further.
And is that the recommendations, something we need to put on the agenda for the next meeting? To look at?
Yes, I'm sure Joanne's nodding her head yes too, but, so yes, and I know there will be more discussion on that at this coming meeting on Monday, and unfortunately, Jeff, I won't be able to be there, so I'll be out of town. So yes, I would add that, ask that we add that to our next meeting's agenda under new business.
Okay. Did you get that, Connor?
I did.
And that's gonna be the URA's recommendation for a zoning overlay and looking and considering form-based zoning overlay. Okay.
And I don't know if Jeremy's online, if he wants to address that a little bit more, we get to him or not.
And that's what you handed out to us is
Yes.
basically a draft of what URA has kind of put together to date. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. So that's something everybody may want to take a look at before the next meeting. Jeremy, do you have any comments relative to what Perry was talking about?
Not really. I think he covered enough of it for this meeting. I think we could dive into specific questions or specifics of that at the next meeting, since it'll be on the agenda.
Okay. City council update.
So last night we were approached with a variance request for Cheryl McCoy for an addition that she was doing on her property adjacent to the 17th Street boundary. And it was a pretty tight setback of 0.07 feet to the property line. That being said, the reasoning that the hardship was taking place was just the specific livability of the interior of the home. And if the addition had gone anywhere else it creates an ADA bathroom for her to age in the home, creates additional living space that was needed for, again, aging in place. And specifically, we went through the report provided by Jeremy and WWC where they recommended approving that variance, so the council did so.
Okay. Anything else?
Ice skating rink, we are having a conversation for the kickoff meeting, specifically with city staff, as well as the engineers that are going to be putting together the PAR, mostly making sure that the criteria that the council would like to see within that report is reflected and agreed to, and making sure that those pieces are in place before they start the project. So that way it's not something towards the end where we feel that pieces are missing. That will be tomorrow here at City Hall. It is open for the public to observe if they so choose, and that will be at 1 p.m.
So the engineering company has been selected.
Correct.
Okay. That it?
I mean, for the most part.
Okay, county representative is not here, so communication from the mayor.
Yeah, can I just add, how many has she missed, and are we tracking that excused, not excused?
I'm checking that.
Haven't been, no.
I can get you a number on that.
Would you follow up with the chairman, see if that's something we need to address or not, because that seems like a trend, or
It's been, what, 3 or 4 meetings?
I think we may be in some danger somewhere. From a mayor's perspective, we have actively begun the position, the process of hiring, I'm going to use the term city administrator as that's kind of a working title. The current process they're doing is defining that job description, and when we're done, the intent is that council will pass a resolution defining what that job description title is, duties, et cetera. At this point, they are doing some interviews and talking to several members within the staff and community members, kind of honing in on that. That the goal is in a couple of weeks at the admin and finance meeting, they're going to come with pretty much a draft description to work with. Jeff, I would like to include you and have them reach out to you to have a Zoom meeting. That position, I imagine, is going to be working very, very closely with the planning board. We've talked about how a lot of those folks tend to have planning backgrounds and stuff, but if you have no objection, I would like to add you to that list.
Sure.
That they reach out to include and share your thoughts, whatever they may be in that conversation. And then the second thing, just by way of information, Councilmember Tupin mentioned that we had a variance request last night. Those actually come directly to the Board of Adjustments, which is defined as the City Council now based on a resolution a couple of years ago. Next meeting in 2 weeks, we actually have an appeal appealing the size restraints that were presented from this board. And just by way of information, I made the planning board chairman aware of that, and that will be on the agenda. It's been published in the newspaper, but just by way of information, there was an appeal of a planning board decision that goes to the Board of Appeals, which is City Council. So that will be at the next meeting. They are basically receiving the same staff report you guys did. So the prep work goes into it is nothing different than the information that was shared with you guys. It's just getting shared with council. And just wanted to make you aware of that process. It's something that anybody has the right to appeal or to do. And this is just a case where they had to do that. And Jeremy, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that. Just informational for my part.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add. Yeah, I'm just going to put together a packet of my staff report to the planning board, meeting minutes from both planning board meetings, and then the record of decision from the planning board's decision on that issue. And that'll be what gets presented. That's what's outlined in the zoning regulations as gets provided to the council for the appeal. So I'll put all that packet together for the next council meeting, and then the council will have the opportunity to review those documents and decide if they want to change the planning board's decision or not.
That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Okay. On the city manager, in this job description, you are looking for some planning background to be included in that?
I think that's part of the discussions that's still happening. I can tell you as a matter of course, that is one of the career paths that leads into city administrator, city manager type positions. I will tell you from my 2 cents, the one thing that this position will not be called is probably a city manager, even though there are some municipalities in Montana that use our form of government that refer to them as that. To me, city manager has a charter governmental form connotation. The primary difference is, does that position report to the mayor? Does that position report to the council? And to change that to a council position, it's basically a voter election thing. And then it may be that as we get that position defined and have somebody in there that in the future they want to change that to a change of form of government. So I said it won't be called the city manager, but there's a list of 15 different things that in the initial draft that we have, but again, Prothman, the firm we're working with, has placed an awful lot of these, so we're looking for them to bring their expertise as well. But planning was one of those potential background tracks that gets in there. One of the things in the job description is to, in the duties, to help identify shortcomings in staff and a recommended way to address those. So, for instance, like right now, one of the places we had a deficiency was in planning, and that's one of those things that we're able to hire out, like an accountant, or there are several skill sets that you can do that with. but that will be one of the job descriptions is identify the deficiencies and identify what the best way to do that is. But like I said, that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, because I want you to be able to voice your concerns and opinions and give that input.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the other position beside was just community development director, so would that be a more appropriate title, or?
That's something we'll let them decide. It was one of the topics that was thrown around. One of the pieces of feedback that we've gotten is that a community development director is generally an economic impact is kind of the key focus of it. And that wasn't necessarily, and I said, well, we'll see what council feels, but I think that was not necessarily the primary, but because that's what we've had before when Peter was here at Taliano.
And
That was his, and he had a planning background.
as did Forrest, and I think James came in underneath Forrest as
Underneath Peter, I believe.
Well-
And he was just I don't think he was ever anything other than the planning director. One of the things in my mind that's really important on this is project management. Somebody can just pick up and you know, go to meetings and kind of manage things through there. But ultimately, that's what we're collecting information for. And then council will settle down and say, here's what that definition is going to be.
Okay. All right. Any questions to the mayor?
Thank you.
All right. Open it up for our first public comment period. If you want to make a comment, come up to the front, state your name, address, and then try to limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Hi, I'm Joanne Eder, and I reside at 301 North Ward, Red Lodge. And I am here on behalf of the Urban Renewal Agency. I'm one of the co-chairs, and I want to thank Perry for presenting the results of our discussion to you. I have the resolution. I was just going to read just the top part of it without all the specifics, if that's okay. The Red Lodge Urban Renewal Agency would like to recommend that the Red Lodge Planning Board consider developing a form-based overlay of zoning for the North Entrance Urban Renewal District. A form-based overlay would ensure that the visions presented in the 2025 Red Lodge Growth Plan and the Urban Renewal District Establishment Document, as well as in the community meetings and surveys facilitated by the Kansas State University TAB team, that they would all be actualized more specifically if we had a form-based overlay. And I want to submit also the wonderful overview that Jeremy Fadness gave us at our working group meeting. It was very, very comprehensive, helped us understand the advantages and disadvantages, and I'm sure he could provide you with a better copy than I have. I just put my copy in there with my notes on it. But he offered several options, and we as a committee opted for the first option, which was the form-based overlay, just briefly because it would be easier for all of us. So whatever you're planning now for that district would be the bottom layer of and then the overlay would modify that to keep the vision of what we want our north entrance to look like. And that would supersede what's underneath. But in the meantime, until it's, he estimated it might take a year to develop that overlay because it involves community meetings, and hopefully he had suggestions for grants that we might be able to get to facilitate that. But in the meantime, whatever you decide on that is going to be in effect, and so it doesn't stop us moving forward. So it seemed like a very practical solution. Thank you, Jeremy, for all the work you did on that. So that's about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne. Anybody else have any comments? Anybody in line have any comments?
Mr. Chairman, I do not see any unmuted mics or raised hands or cameras on online.
All right. So we don't have any, I'll close public comment period for now. And again, remind you that have another opportunity to comment on anything that's been discussed or anything else you want to bring up at the end of the meeting as well, so.
I do have a question. We had talked about adding another property, that 5 acres on the, up on Highway 78 to the URD. Is that something that comes from the planning board, or does it come from the URA? Where does altering those, Jeremy probably has a better clue. Jeremy, if we want to change the boundaries and include another 5 acre parcel in the URD, where does that come from? The planning board, the URA?
I would have to look back. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I would have to look back at the urban renewal district processes, but that would be an urban renewal district function, not a planning board function. So the planning board, zoning commission only deals with the zoning portion of the city, right? And planning issues. The URD deals with anything within the urban renewal district. So the urban renewal district boundaries would have to be amended through the process outlined in their processes to include any new properties.
Thank you.
Which is city council.
So does city council make the final decision, or does it have to go out for a public vote
No,
as well?
it is city council decision. It was established, shut down, or modified by city council.
Okay.
Because we did modify it once, I believe. So I just didn't know who did it. So before we start making an overlay map.
And I apologize, I may have blinked. I didn't catch which 5 acres. I know there was a discussion at one point in time about the top of the hill.
Top of the hill.
Is that yeah.
That's the piece that I was referring to.
Okay, and that had come up before, and my recollection is that there was not an appetite to do that from this group or from council. And I think there was some questions about the definitions of blight, is what I recall, and whether it met those sufficiently.
Okay.
All right. There's no new business, so we continue on with the old business. So I'll turn the meeting over to you, Jeremy. And
Thanks.
I believe we're starting with manufactured homes and then going on to RV parks.
That is correct. Yep. So I took our meeting from a month ago. I took back your suggestions and thoughts on this, and I've split it up into 2 sections as requested. I also did a deep dive into some other zoning regulations and other community regulations for both of these to kind of incorporate into our review, as well as state law language and sections and those sorts of things. So so the first section is just manufactured home communities. Essentially, I just modified the manufactured home communities section that you already had and expanded upon that. Again, kind of taking, because we can't review that as a subdivision anymore, we basically have to review that through the zoning process now. So same thing with RV parks, right? So previously, if anybody had proposed a manufactured home community, it was considered a subdivision. And so we would have had to go through the subdivision process, and the subdivision regulations would have specified a lot of these design requirements as far as access, water, sewer, those sorts of things. Now we have to basically have that in our zoning regulations. So we have our purpose and intent section, or purpose and applicability section, which I think is pretty straightforward. Hopefully you've all had a chance to, I know I sent it out yesterday, but hopefully you've all had a chance to at least maybe hopefully skim through it. And I don't want to necessarily read verbatim everything unless you would like me to. So purpose and applicability is pretty straightforward. It's for manufactured home communities. Basically, this is intended for if somebody proposes 2 or more spaces to lease or rent out for somebody to bring in a manufactured home to put on that lot. This is not for the creation of lots that would be sold for purposes of manufactured homes, okay? That would be a subdivision. If you're creating lots that would be sold, that's considered a subdivision, and that would go under subdivision regulations. So this is restricted just to if somebody proposes a 10-space mobile home park that they want to just rent or lease the spaces for somebody to bring their own manufactured home into. So review and approval, we have our, the review and approval section. Basically, this just says if depending on the zoning district, if it requires a zoning review or conditional use permit process, then they have to follow that process. And then, that's basically what this section says. And then there's some state law requirements on manufactured housing that do restrict the ability of the city to treat manufactured housing differently from factory built housing. So the last paragraph essentially says manufactured housing and factory built housing should not be subject to a different or more restrictive land use approval solely because the dwelling was constructed off-site. That's directly from state law language. And this section does not do that. This section outlines the requirements for development of the spaces to place those homes on, right? So we're not putting any restrictions necessarily on the units themselves. That's building permit issue. This is just the development plan to accommodate those. Any questions on that?
Any questions? Go ahead, Jeremy.
Okay, and then Sandy, I believe, had a question at the last meeting on tiny dwelling units. And so there was actually some language in state law that I was able to pull into this, and we added that clarification. And I don't know if it fully clears it up, but this language is from state law, and essentially what it means is that tiny homes, depending on how they're constructed, cannot be excluded essentially from anything. So, if it's on a permanent foundation, then it must meet the requirements of that type of dwelling unit. If it has wheels and it has, has all those other things like a manufactured home does, then it has to meet the standards of those. So, hopefully that helps clarify that a little bit for you, Sandy, and the rest of the planning board.
As long as we have a good definition in the back, whether you want to refer to it as a tiny home or a tiny dwelling, I see it's both in that paragraph. I just want to make sure that we have the appropriate definition.
Okay.
Have we defined in the ADU area, is language in that clear on, in other words, could somebody put a tiny home in their backyard on wheels, or would it need to be on a foundation?
I don't think that we have anything one way or another.
We haven't gotten to the accessory dwelling unit section. So when we get to that, we can work through that. There are state law requirements for ADUs now that the city has to follow. But we can get to that when we get to the ADU section.
Okay.
So the section 4 state and federal requirements, this is essentially just outlining other requirements for manufactured housing, which is there's DEQ requirements for sanitation. There's Department of Public Health and Human Services requires them to be licensed. There are U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development has manufactured home construction standards, which all manufactured homes have to meet. and that's all part of building permit review. And then some other, citations, I guess, in that section. And then at the end, we basically just say evidence of required state plan approval shall be submitted before issuance of any permits for improvements depending upon those approvals. So essentially what that means is, we need to have the DPHHS license for that before you can, for any occupancy, right? Before they can start moving any trailers in there, right? We need the DEQ sanitation review approvals before they can move anything in there, right? So that's just clearly states that we need those additional approvals before any of that sort of thing. Any questions on that?
Questions? Go ahead, Jeremy.
Okay, so section 5, this outlines the requirements for submitting the site plan and conditional use permit review plans for the manufactured home community. So this is basically a checklist of all the things we need to see on a site plan and in the application materials. I'm not going to go through this whole list. It's a pretty exhaustive list. If the planning board has any questions on this list, or if you want to add, if you think we need to add or take anything out, I guess let me know.
I think we need to take out mail delivery facilities because we don't have mail delivery in the city limits.
Actually, we do.
You
Well,
get
and
mail delivery?
No, but there are several sections in the city that do.
And I do say mail delivery facilities when centralized delivery is required. So that would mean they would have to coordinate with the postal service and provide that with the application, right? On whether or not it's going to be PO box based or they're going to need a central, like a neighborhood box unit or something.
Better to have it in there. Who knows if they change their mind?
Yeah, I mean, if you never know what might happen in the future, right? Too, and if it's one of those things, and they have correspondence from the post office that the post office will serve this with PO boxes, then that's all they have to provide.
I do have a question in this section. Specifically, we have the things that are required to be shown in the site plan, but do we have criteria for expectations of these items? So that's the one concern I would have is we get an application in, it's like, well, it has all the things in the application, but what makes it satisfactory and what's the criteria for the planning board or the planner?
Well,
to use
we'll see those in the next sections. So this is
okay.
we have development standards going into the next sections, right? And then some of these things also just have to follow other sections of the zoning regulations. Like, for instance, we have a whole section on stormwater treatment, right? So they would need to meet, for stormwater, they would need to meet that section of the zoning regulations for stormwater, right? And those sort of things. Okay, next section is density and manufactured home spacing. So we had quite a bit of discussion on this last time as far as the density and manufactured home spacing. And so I kind of took a closer look at this, and I really wanted to tie this into what the underlying zoning district requirements were for density. So rather than come up with some arbitrary, we think we need 5,000 square foot space or whatever, why not tie it to what we already require for that district? So if we require 7,500 square foot minimum lot size, why not tie that into the manufactured home community and make sure that that same kind of density basically is being followed, right? If that makes sense. And so that's what this section kind of does. The maximum residential density shall not exceed the density otherwise permitted for the residential development in the underlying zoning district. Where density is derived from minimum lot area, the equivalent minimum lot area shall be used to determine the maximum number of dwelling units within the overall development. So what that means is if the minimum lot size in that district is 7,500 square feet, and they have a 15,000 square foot lot, they would only be allowed to put in 2 manufactured home sites. Right? Is basically what that means. Because that's the density we require, 1 dwelling unit per, for that minimum lot size. If that makes sense.
But in R4, they could go substantially more dense. Yeah.
Right. So it depends on the underlying zoning, right? Is what we're basing it on.
Yeah, okay.
Space size, an individual renter or lease space need to not comply with the minimum lot area applicable to the separately platted lot, provided the overall development complies with the maximum density. Each space shall be of sufficient size and configuration to accommodate the dwelling, accessory structures, parking, utility facilities, required separations, and usable outdoor area shown on the approved plan. Boundaries of all those spaces shall be clearly marked. Each home space shall obtain vehicular access from an approved internal street. Basically, that's meaning none of the spaces being proposed can access an adjacent existing city street. They have to have their own internal driveways, private driveways or roadways. Buildings along the exterior boundary of the community shall comply with the setbacks applicable to the residential development in the underlying zoning district. So that means around the perimeter of the lot, those units or those spaces would have to comply with that setback requirement. So on the front of the lot, those units would have to be set back. If the front setback is 20 feet, those units would have to be set back 20 feet in compliance with the underlying zoning. Side setback, if it's 10 feet, they have to be set back 10 feet, right? Same thing with the rear, whatever that underlying zoning requirement is. And then internal separation. Manufactured homes and accessory structures shall maintain the separation required by the adopted building and fire codes. I think this one was the important one because we want to make sure that anything they propose meets fire code requirements, right? And so this gives us that power to make sure that occurs. Greater separation may be required when necessary for fire apparatus access, utilities, drainage, or other documented health and safety requirements. So it also gives us the ability to require further separation if we feel there's a need for it. Any questions on that section?
No.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
Okay. Utilities. So this is where we just get into the water, sewer, those sorts of things. So each manufactured home intended for permanent residential occupancy shall be connected to an approved potable water supply, wastewater. We should probably just say the cities. To the cities. Potable water supply, wastewater disposal system.
Why? Why should we specify the cities?
Well, this is all going to be in the city, so we want anything in the city to be connected to city services.
And we do have separate ordinances that dictate that.
Yeah.
That
Okay.
you will be.
Yep, we have.
So if we annex land that is not currently on city services, they have to install that.
The
Correct.
way the ordinance is within 500 feet, so yeah. Natural gas, propane, telecommunications, cable, or other similar services are not required solely by this section, but when provided shall comply with applicable codes. So that basically just means the developer can decide if they want to provide natural gas, whatever they want to provide in their manufactured home community. Utility distribution systems shall be underground. I think I actually reviewing this now, I want to take that's the section, the rest of that out. I think we want to specify that all utility systems shall be underground.
So after utility, just cut it there?
Yep, so just all utility distributions shall be underground, period. We require that in our subdivision regulations too, so it's pretty standard anymore. Things don't go above ground anymore typically. So I think they would have to provide a pretty dang good reason why they couldn't go underground with their utilities. Yeah, and then just some other requirements. Is there any questions on that section?
Any questions?
Should we include propane? If they have to hook up to city services?
I did in I guess it's B, it's mislabeled, but I have natural gas, propane, telecommunications when provided. The city doesn't provide propane, do you?
No. Actually, the city doesn't provide natural gas, but,
Yeah.
but propane definitely.
Yeah, they would just
Oh, go ahead.
they would just work with those utility providers for whatever services they wanted to provide in their development.
And I imagine if we have anything on propane tanks in terms of, safety regulations and or screening, if that is the same, are they gonna be doing shared propane for the manufactured community? Those would be the only things that I would have any sort of concern that would come back, but if it's not a worry to you, it's not a worry to me.
We have another section, I remember it coming up under distribution, and it had to do with the size of the tanks. I think that's in a different section of zoning.
Yeah, I think that's totally different.
Would we even want to allow propane within the city if you hook up to Northwestern Energy natural gas? Is that even an option?
Natural gas is underground.
Right.
Propane is
That's
in
what,
a tank, and
that's what I'm saying is,
do we want it?
do we want propane tanks above ground?
I don't necessarily have an issue with propane tanks being above ground, again, it's one more fuel source if someone has the opportunity. They're used safely and outside of city limits, and I don't necessarily think that they can be unattractive, but they can also be attractive. I don't see a reason to limit people's fuel sources, especially if, Northwest Energy starts to get really out of control with their prices. I would love to have a propane heat source.
Yeah, but there has been a history here and also in Billings of fires from outdoor propane.
I mean, I'm sure it's happened, but I mean, the same way that it would in the county or things of that nature. I think if it was a big public health and safety issue, we would be hearing more about it on a regular basis. Again, there's history of fires in garages and fire pits and you name it, fires happen. I mean, they happen with restaurants and hood vents, we're not gonna eliminate, french fries for grease fires. So.
Well, and if somebody proposes to put in anything like that to heat their, manufactured home, they're gonna have to meet all those code requirements that are required of that. So there's very specific fire code and building code requirements for the placement of propane tanks. They have to be so far from a structure, lines have to be buried underground, there's all sorts of code requirements for that.
That's why I'm asking, do we even want to mention propane in A? Is that A up there? Or natural gas and
A under A?
Well, I think it's important, what he's saying is that it does still have to apply, they don't get exceptions.
It does say or similar services.
Yeah.
Can we just drop the word propane and leave or similar services?
See an issue with leaving.
I just don't want to encourage it, because it does open another box of having them screened from view and how far they have to be especially in a manufactured home community where you'd put the propane tank, and then how far it would be. There's lots of other regulations that would follow with that.
I just feel like that would just be included with the code. maybe not the screening, but
I mean, we could always just change that to say other
You have it.
utilities or services are not required solely by this section, but when provided shall comply with applicable codes.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any comments on propane versus natural gas?
Okay. You want to move on to next section? Installation, foundations, and anchoring. This basically just goes through the requirements. And a lot of these requirements are going to be building code requirements, but I don't think it's necessarily bad to include them in the zoning as well. A lot of these are HUD installation requirements. And we also do talk about a little bit about, additions, decks, porches, garages, things like that, shall also obtain all the permits required for building and zoning. It also provides a requirement that all underfloor areas shall be enclosed or skirted. Actually, I want to say shall be enclosed or skirted, period. In compliance with applicable installation standards, manufacturer's instructions, or building requirements. Required enclosures shall provide necessary ventilation and access and shall use durable code compliant materials. Any questions on that section?
Anybody have any more questions? Go ahead, Jeremy.
Okay, street circulation, emergency access. So in this section, basically just outlining that internal streets may be public or private as approved through development review. Now, one thing I did want to ask is a lot of times we don't, as a community or as a government, want to be responsible for maintenance of any roads within a manufactured home community. So my feeling is I would rather say that all internal streets shall be private, and privately maintained, because I don't think we want a bunch of, if somebody proposes this, a bunch of, internal access roads that the city would be responsible for plowing or maintaining. It should be the responsibility of the person who owns the property and who's renting or leasing those lots. Is that the feeling of the group?
Any comments on that?
Oh, agreed.
Yes.
Got it. Looks like we're agreed.
Okay. Streets and drive aisles shall be designed to safely accommodate residents, service vehicles, moving and installation of manufactured homes, snow removal, and emergency apparatus. I think the intent of this section is to ensure that all streets and drive aisles have the widths, grades, turning radiuses, surfacing, and turnarounds that comply with fire code. So essentially what that means is fire code right now would require a 20-foot minimum clear driving area, right? So that's independent typically of on-street parking. So if they were proposing no on-street parking, then, they could do a 20-foot driving surface. If they were proposing for people to be allowed to park on the street, then they would propose 32 foot roughly driving. So to allow for that on-street parking so that the fire and emergency services can still navigate through that street, even if cars are parked on the street. Then the next section I do talk about where we did talk about the number of ingress and egress routes into the development. And last meeting we had talked about tying that to the same number that is required or was required in the subdivision regulations, and essentially that's 5 or less lots or 5 or less spaces require at least 1 point of ingress and egress, and then 6 or more spaces would require 2 points of ingress and egress for emergency
Yeah.
services. And this section also requires that they coordinate with emergency services, right? Fire to make sure that they are providing the number and location of entrances and access points adopted by fire code, traffic conditions, the size, street connectivity, and other things.
That threshold of 5, 6 or more, or 5 or less, is that based on recommendations from emergency services, or?
So
I guess where's that number? Is that a number we came up with last meeting, or is there something that we can tie it to make it more?
So that is tied to subdivision requirements, right? So when this was under subdivision review, under the subdivision regulations for the city, that would have been the requirement. A minor subdivision is 5 lots or less. That requires 1 point of ingress and egress. 6 or more requires 2, at least 2. They could always provide more. So that's where those numbers come from. Is essentially we're just tying it to the subdivision regulation requirements.
Okay.
Jeremy, I had a question. These are manufactured home communities. There's going to be full-time residents, rentals, and leases. A rental and a lease this is assuming that the space is leased, although earlier we talked about some of those spaces could be purchased.
No, not under this section. So there's there's 2 different. Okay. Yeah. So under this section, a manufactured home community in this section is only if somebody owns the property and they rent or lease the space, and somebody brings their own manufactured home into that space, and that person's just renting or leasing the space. If somebody wants to create a lot that they will sell to somebody to put a manufactured home on, that is a subdivision, because they're creating a lot. And so that would then go through the subdivision review process. And because it's a subdivision, then all of those lots would have to meet the underlying zoning requirements, like minimum lot sizes, like all the requirements. It would be a lot that you could develop, right? So all the access requirements, all the zoning requirements of the zoning, all those things required of a subdivision would be required for a situation in that case.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions on this section?
Only other question I have is, I assume, and I'm not trying to open a can of worms again. I assume that all of the street regulations would be determined by the property owner.
They would. So with their site plan application, conditional use permit application, right? They would submit a design for their development, right? On that design, they would show us what they're proposing. So that would be their width of their streets, their turnaround radiuses, all those things. We would also require that they coordinate with the fire department or the fire chief to make sure and provide correspondence from the fire chief that this meets applicable fire code and meets, all those things. So that's basically what this section requires. All right, parking. So basically, again, we're kind of
Wait.
oh, sorry.
I thought we didn't allow dead-end streets in the city. So we would allow a dead-end street in a manufactured home community?
Private drive.
Well, it's basically a private drive, and essentially this would be for anything with 5 spaces or less, right? Because they're only required to have a minimum of 1. Anything over 5, anything 6 or more would require 2 points of ingress and egress, so that would get rid of that dead end.
So it doesn't apply because they're private streets?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, what you're talking about is a subdivision regulation requirement that doesn't allow dead end streets.
Yeah.
And those are city maintained, city owned streets in that situation. In this case, these are private roads, private driveways, essentially,
Okay.
that are privately maintained.
Okay.
All right, parking. Basically, again, tied this back to the underlying zoning district requirements. So off-street parking shall be provided in accordance with the parking requirements, otherwise applicable to dwelling units in the underlying zoning district. So if that zoning requires 2 off-street parking spaces for a dwelling unit, then each space would have to provide 2 off-street parking spaces on that space. And then we also have some requirements for additional guest parking. So, for example, if they propose no on-street parking in their proposal, and just a 20-foot width to meet fire code requirements, then we would require them to provide some form of guest parking. Some kind of a parking area for people who are visiting the community. Any questions on that section?
Well, going back to the dead-end streets, so this is just kind of so if somebody comes forward and wants to develop a parcel for manufactured community, or subdivide a parcel or manufactured home community, how would the street alignment and connectivity to the city's street network apply or be affected? I understand the internal street part is private, but the connectivity, I'm just trying to understand a little bit. If somebody has a large parcel and they want to subdivide it and make one part of it a manufactured home and then the other parcel something else, how are those parcels connected to the street network? And would that be handled under subdivision then and not under this?
I mean, again, it depends on, if they were say they were proposing to subdivide into single family residential lots in the north half of a parcel, that, and then the south half of the parcel was going to be this manufactured home community. They would have to show as part of the subdivision application all of those things you're describing, right? So they would have to provide a proposed plan for the manufactured home community that meets this section of the zoning requirements, because in subdivision, we require a subdivision to meet zoning. So they would have to provide all this information in their subdivision application, as well as the street network connectivity, all those things of the subdivided portion that would be required of the subdivision regulations. Does that answer your question?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Next question is landscaping, screening in common areas. The development shall comply with landscaping standards applicable to residential development of comparable scale. Landscaping, so basically it's just saying any landscaping requirements that are required of the other requirements in the zoning apply to manufactured home communities. So if we require landscaping, essentially we're looking at this as a multifamily development, right? So if we it's not necessarily an apartment building or condo development, but if it's a manufactured home community, it's reviewed as multifamily housing on one lot essentially, right? And so it would have to meet the landscaping requirements of that that we would apply to any other multifamily housing development that we have in the rest of the zoning.
So if somebody wants to create a manufactured home development and it's next door to regular residential areas, they don't have to screen? According to this, it's identified incompatibility with an adjoining non-residential use. So because this is a residential use, I mean, I don't know if a regular home would be happy to look out their window and see a mobile home park.
So I'm going to refer you back to state law that says you cannot treat manufactured housing differently from stick-built housing. That is a very specific requirement of state law. So just because it's still a residential use, just because it's manufactured housing, does not mean it's incompatible with other adjacent residential uses. You can't.
And that's why it's non-residential.
Yep. Yeah. So you can't single out manufactured housing as different than stick-built housing.
Do we have anything in here that manufactured housing has to be after 1976, or do we have something about?
Yes, we have we have the references to the HUD requirements, which that's what you're referring to. So
yeah,
any homes within this have to meet those HUD construction standards that were developed in 1976 or whatever.
Okay.
Yep. And again, that'll be mostly, so that portion of, so when you're reviewing a manufactured home community, so say somebody comes in and does a conditional use permit for a manufactured home community, you're basically reviewing to make sure that the spaces they're providing, that the density, that the access, snow storage, water and sewer is provided to each lot, all those things are provided on their site plan. You're not going to be reviewing to make sure that they're meeting those building permit requirements. So that'll be Brian's job when somebody wants to move in a trailer onto one of the spaces. That will be his job as the building inspector or the building review person to make sure that that home meets those guidelines.
Making sure that the lot is good, and then whatever goes onto that lot is Brian's job.
Yep. Yeah, we're just reviewing the space that's being created and how it's being served, essentially, right? And reviewing any impacts that development will have on traffic, water, sewer, stormwater, all those things. Just the same thing with that we would review essentially for a multifamily housing development. We're going to be reviewing the same thing for this, right?
Got it.
Okay. Next section, refuse storage, mail, and snow management. Basically, this just outlines, garbage requirements. Outdoor storage shall be limited to areas approved for that purpose. So they basically have to provide that on the site plan if they're going to have any outdoor storage within the development that people can store things. If they don't provide that on the site plan, then they can't do it, right? They would have to come back in and ask for review and approval of putting that in. Getting back to the mail delivery, centralized mail facilities required by the United States Post shall be safely located Um,
Outside.
then adequate areas for snow storage. Obviously, this is a big one for Red Lodge. So providing adequate areas for snow storage shall be identified where snow will not obstruct parking, pedestrian facilities, and other things. Any questions on that section?
You covered stormwater earlier, didn't you? I think that came under
Sorry,
another
refer to
section.
Yeah, that's part of the what they need to provide in their site plan.
Okay.
Part of the site plan application requirements. I don't specifically pull that out of here or, have a section on stormwater because we have a whole section on stormwater in the zoning regulations. So they essentially just have to meet those stormwater regulations that we already have.
Okay. I guess where I was kind of coming from is if there's a stormwater system adjacent to the proposed development, they would have to connect into the stormwater system or else provide some mechanism for storing or managing the stormwater, and that's handled in elsewhere in their code.
That's
We
handled.
don't need to spell it out here.
Yeah, we don't have to spell that out here. You have a whole section of stormwater requirements in the zoning regulations later on under supplemental regulations or something. I can't remember what it's called, but you have a whole section on stormwater requirements that we review for all projects. So they would have to meet that requirement.
Okay.
So the next section is just maintenance. That's just basically outlining that the owner, association or manager responsible for common areas shall maintain street. Basically, it's just outlining that the owner is responsible for maintenance of all of those internal items, streets, drainage facilities, utilities under its control, landscaping, common, blah, blah, blah. And then we also have a section in here that says any abandoned, burn, wrecked, or unsafe dwellings or accessory structures shall be secured and removed or repaired in accordance with the applicable nuisance building or fire codes. I think that's an important one because sometimes you do see those abandoned or wrecked ones end up sitting in a manufactured home community for some time without being addressed. And so I think that's an important thing to have in here. Gives the city some enforcement ability. Permits and inspections. The property owner is responsible for requiring or obtaining all required zoning, building, installation, utility, and other permits. Pretty standard language. No manufactured home shall be occupied until all inspections and approvals are required by the agency having jurisdiction have been completed. And then nothing in this section transfers to the city any inspection responsibility assigned by state or federal law to another agency. I think that's an important statement because DPHHS and DEQ also have review authority over manufactured home communities. And we don't want to take responsibility as a city over anything that's their purview. And then the last section is just some more legal language as far as operation of those communities. So that's all I have for manufactured home communities. Is there any questions, concerns, anything anybody wants to go back to or discuss?
I think it's well done.
Yes, thank you for separating those.
Yeah.
All right.
I think we're all good with it.
Okay, well, let's dive into recreational vehicle parks. This section isn't quite as long as manufactured home communities because they don't have quite the same protections that manufactured housing has. So, again, purpose and applicability. is for orderly and safe sanitary compatible development of RV parks intended for temporary recreational lodging. A recreational vehicle park is a transient lodging or campground use and is not a residential subdivision or manufactured home community for the purposes of these zoning standards. I think that's an important distinction because they're two separate uses. RV parks and manufactured home communities are two completely different types of uses, right? And so we need to make sure that those are distinctly separated. A recreational vehicle park shall obtain the land use approval required by the allowed use table, which basically we have that as a conditional use permit in those districts that we discussed. Subdivision or sanitation review shall also be obtained when required by Montana law. That is mostly referring to DEQ review, because they would have to go through a DEQ subdivision review and sanitation process. The city wouldn't go through a subdivision process, obviously, at this point, but DEQ still goes through a subdivision review process for RV parks. Any expansion that increases the approved number of spaces, changes the type of spaces or utility service, materially changes access or circulation, or expands the developed area shall be reviewed as an amendment to the approved plan and shall obtain a plan review required for the alteration. So basically, it's just saying if they get conditional use permit for 10 RV spaces, and then they decide they will actually want to put in 15, another 5, say at a later date, they'd have to come back through conditional use permit review to add those 5 spaces. The next section just outlines state requirements for RV parks. Again, DPHHS is involved, DEQ is involved, fire, public works, floodplain, all those other code requirements that we require of other developments, and then any other applicable state or federal requirements. RV parks also do require a DPHHS license, similarly to manufactured home parks. All right, the next section is the temporary occupancy and mobility. Recreational vehicle parks are intended for temporary occupancy. Now, I do have a highlighted section here. Do we want to set a duration of occupancy? You know, we kind of talked about this a little bit at the last meeting, but I don't know that we necessarily settled on anything. And I just wanted to highlight that and see if that's something that we do want to set a duration. 90 days, 180 days, something like that.
I don't think the duration's required, but I do think the ability to move is required. It's more so maintaining a condition that can keep it temporary. So if it does have to relocate, it isn't just like, okay, let's take off the wheels and here we go. I got a cabin, we're good.
Well, that's kind of the rest of this section outlines that stuff, right?
Yeah, so I
okay.
don't think we need a duration.
At what point does it become a primary residence?
Yeah.
I mean, does that, I kind of think we should set a duration on it, simply because we don't want them to move an RV on there and live there forever, because it's cheaper.
But are we trying to make more affordable housing?
We are, but not through, we want it to be a temporary solution to the problem, not a permanent solution to the problem. So at what point does temporary become permanent? And I think that's your question. I was kind of thinking seasonal, maybe setting it 3 or 4 months.
I think if we do it, you're going to pick a date and to keep it from being arbitrary, as opposed to seasonal or something along those lines, keep it consistent with state definitions of primary residency.
Which is 6 months.
7 months.
6 months and a day.
I don't know exactly what it is. So that would be my recommendation. If you're gonna do it, that would, I personally don't think we should have a duration. I think that, you know, I might wanna be doing this through 3 years, save enough money so I can buy a house. I don't think I can do that in 6 months.
But you could rent one.
Yeah, that's just paying someone else's mortgage. It doesn't do me any good. So again, I think if we truly are trying to look at some options, putting a duration on this is a little contradictory to what we've discussed as a board and what the community has discussed. I know it's not the ideal scenario, but unfortunately, it's not an ideal climate either. So that would be my strong recommendation, is that we don't necessarily need to set an occupancy or a duration. I think your guidelines of what the concerns would be is more so when someone becomes a permanent resident, what permanence comes around that? Like, do they now have weird planters and like picnic tables that they've added? It's that exterior condition, and it's that level of permanence that I think is more of the mental block, not necessarily if that same RV's been parked there for 5 years. If it looks like an RV and it acts like an RV and you can move it and all of those types of pieces, then what's the difference? It could be 4 different RVs that look the same.
And what resets it, right, so that's the other
Yeah.
piece, all you gotta do is move it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Then
Different
you
spots,
reset, so
rotate.
then it goes back to our conversation about we're a complaint guided compliance instead of, right, so it's, it goes into that, who's gonna do it?
And, yeah, so
Well,
for my eyes,
and I think
that-
also policing that might be hard too. I know we had that conversation at the last meeting, is trying to, enforce that. It would be fairly difficult, I think, from a city's perspective, but.
Yep.
yeah, I think it's more about the condition around it versus the actual condition of doing it.
Sue, Perry, you have any thoughts?
Well, I keep going back to everything except having the RVs parked at the intersections in the summer where you can't see. There's some things that are a problem and some things that aren't a problem. And so I generally think of the problems first, and then the other stuff, I'll listen to what other people have to say.
So it'd be nice for those folks that have their RVs here year-round to be able to just park them over there, not on the street.
Mm-hmm. There's a thought with that. I know there are a lot of people that don't want an RV anywhere near them, but it has different purposes for different people in different situations. And I think considering all of that, we could find a middle road for most things.
Perry?
In the unlikely event that someone wanted to put an RV park in Red Lodge in town, because right now I think the only area is C3 North, and I'm not sure where we have space to do it, but living in an RV for any period of time on a more semi-permanent basis is not the same as living in your house or living in a mobile home, manufactured home. You can't attach your RV permanently to sewer. You can attach to electric, you can attach to water. But the sewer has to be, you have to physically go out and pull your valve open every time you want to empty it. I mean, sometimes people think you can just leave the hose attached and leave it open, but what happens is, it's not like your house. There's not water flushing everything out every time you flush the toilet. You end up with this big pile of stuff in your holding tank. So it's a lot different living experience, and it's not the kind of place where I think most people would choose to spend a long period of time. I mean, they do in some places, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And it's not insulated well. You don't have skirting, and so I think the way that Jeremy's written this is very good. It excludes a lot of things that you would see in, if you go to other communities, you see in some of their RV parks that have become permanent places where people are putting sheds, and there's all kinds of storage around them, and even skirting, because some parks some mobile home parks require, manufactured home parks will take in RVs, but they require them to be skirted just like a manufactured home.
I noticed here, it says all RV, this is further down, all RV sites shall be designed with water, sewer, and electrical service.
Well, you have to have the sewers, it's a hole in the ground, and you take a hose and attach it to your RV, and that,
And that's what he's referring to as sewer.
yeah.
Yeah, or a dump station.
You have to have some place to dump your sewage.
Yeah. Basically just making sure that there is a way to deal with it, so they're not just dumping it into the side of the street.
I don't know what that disconnectable type is, but I know the one that we have at Alpine, that at one point in time, they did have sewer connections that they were gonna do at all of those, so I don't know.
Well, there are,
Disconnectable.
it's a hole in the ground that's plumbed into the city's sewer system, but from the RV to that is a flexible hose.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like a clean out.
You remove and put into your RV in a storage compartment when you're gonna pull out. So anyway, I think Jeremy did a good job with what he's proposed.
Doc, do you want to set a duration?
What's that?
So you don't think a duration is an issue?
I think the way he's got it written, it's not really, I mean, even if you're gonna winter,
Yeah. Even
Chelsea, you probably talk to some younger people, you try to spend the winter in an RV here, it's not a fun experience.
And again, like, they have conditions and skirting, but it's all, to me, it's not about the concept of being parked there for an extended period of time. It's about the condition of how you keep that parking area.
Right.
And the fact that you do have the dump stations and you do have the facilities to be able to keep that and maintain that temporary use, even if, I mean, my house was supposed to be a 2-year flip, I'm still there, but again, I just personally don't think that it's necessary to put a duration, and I don't think that if it's abused, if you have the right rules around how it looks, I don't think it would matter, besides someone personally just looking down on someone for living in an RV.
Well, I don't think we should know, because it goes back to who's gonna police it? I mean, that's at the end of the day. That's,
Whoever owns
and
the
it's well
RV
written.
park.
I mean, that's the other part here. So that's my 2 cents.
Jeremy, other RV parks, do they set a duration?
I have not, I've never seen one that has a regulation that has a set time
Maximum.
period. I think that the way this is written, I mean, it's very clear that these are supposed to be temporary and not permanent. And the way this is written allows the city an opportunity that if they do find a situation where somebody has attached a porch and a deck and, put storage buildings in the space and all these other things that indicate a permanent living situation, the city has the ability to go in and issue a violation letter for that. Right. And so if it continues to make, look like an RV and it acts like an RV, and then, it's not in violation. But if, they start putting skirting on it and they start removing wheels and they start doing all those other things, then that's clearly a violation, and then the city could issue a violation letter. I think it would be hard to, in my opinion, it's hard for the city to enforce a 180-day time limit, just because, are you going to have somebody checking that RV park every day to see who comes in and out? Are you going to have a log of license plates to make sure that, and then, cataloging how many days that person is in that space? And then if they do exceed the 180 days, that you're actually issuing a violation letter to the owner of the RV park, not to the person that's staying there. But I think it just becomes problematic on how to enforce it.
I just assumed that an RV park was that you had to pay to be in there, so it would be a privately owned RV park, and that they would be the ones that would be doing the policing, not the city.
Yeah, but how, I mean, the city I mean, that's what your zoning is for, right? At some level, you are policing compliance with your own zoning regulations at some point, right? So if you get an owner that doesn't care if somebody's there for longer than 180 days, then they're not policing it. I mean, they're getting paid, right? They're getting paid for every day that person's there, or weekly or whatever. It's on the city's responsibility to issue a violation if there is a violation.
Okay.
I mean, you would think a responsible owner would say, okay, this is the zoning requirement, this is what we'll follow, but not everybody thinks that way. So, and that's where that violation process comes into play, that's why we have to use that violation process sometimes, because some people don't think the rules apply to them.
So I kind of hearing the consensus is to not have a specify specific duration. That
Okay. And then just the last section of this, I just wanted to point out is we do specify manufactured homes and tiny dwelling units designed for permanent residential occupancy shall not be placed on recreational vehicle spaces, right? Because those
So
are
a tiny home that's on a trailer,
No,
where can it go?
It says tiny dwellings designed for permanent residential occupancy. So if it's a tiny home on a trailer with wheels and it acts like an RV, then that would be fine. But if it's meant to go on a permanent foundation or something like that, right? Then and meant for permanent occupation, then it doesn't belong in an RV park.
I do have a question. Jeremy, I mean, there's obviously some concerns in the room about occupancy, length of time, but one of the things you would find in a park that allows people to spend a lot of time there is the size of, they can bring in auxiliary propane tanks, not the tanks that are attached to their unit. Is it feasible to put a limitation on the size of a propane tank?
I think I might have.
Yeah, that's one of the other, for everyone else, that's one of the other hassles of living in an RV is your propane tanks are very small.
So under fire and life safety, I have propane cylinders and systems shall be approved for the recreational vehicle or installation in which they are used. Bulk propane systems shall obtain all required permits. That's what I currently have in there.
Okay.
Does that cover it? Bulk? Huh.
I mean, I kind of feel like if somebody puts a large 100-gallon propane tank next to their RV and they plumb it in, that indicates to me that's a permanent residence, and I think we could issue a violation letter for that, right? Because I don't, at that point, I don't see that as a temporary living situation if you're putting in a 100-gallon propane tank next to a, or 1,000-gallon, whatever they are, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But if somebody's got, a 50-pound, portable propane tank, so they don't have to refill a 20-pound one every 2 weeks. It's still portable. It's not permanent. You're still using the RV. Right. You're still using the RV's infrastructure to hook into that tank. You're not permanently plumbing in a large bulk tank, right? So I think that's the difference.
Okay.
Okay, the next section is just the development plan requirements like we had with the manufactured home communities. Just this is what all the requirements are to provide with the application. And then the next section we get into the density, setbacks, and separations. Basically, this again says unless the underlying zoning district or an applicable state or fire safety requirement is more restrictive, the gross density of an RV park shall not exceed 20 RV spaces per acre. RV vehicles shall be separated from other recreational vehicles and occupied structures by at least 15 feet. No RV space shall be located within 25 feet of a public street or highway right-of-way. And there was some discussion on this last time. I don't know if we had talked about 100 feet or something, I think, from the highway. Like a 100-foot buffer for RV parks or something like that. I'm trying to remember that conversation, but so we could change if that's something that you want, we could say 25 feet from public city streets or something, or 100 feet from a highway right of way or something like that to provide that buffer.
I think we were more concerned with screening.
Screening, yeah.
Screening from the highway, for sure.
I remember we had
cover?
a discussion about a buffer area from the highway, but I couldn't remember if we settled on
Yeah.
100 feet or whether we wanted to do that or not.
I think it was a little column A, column B of, do we have a buffer, or do we have screening, or are the two not mutually exclusive? Because,
Or do we have both?
yeah, should we have both? Because, I mean, I like the idea of having a little bit of a buffer between the main street, and I think 25 feet seems pretty solid.
In section 11, you have a landscape perimeter buffer not less than 10 feet in width shall be provided.
I love that.
So the landscaping itself is 10 feet wide?
At least.
I believe so. Under landscaping, screening, and lighting that you're talking about. Yeah, landscape
Yeah.
perimeter buffer not less than 10 feet in width. So that means they have to have a 10-foot wide landscaped area. Shall be provided where the RV park adjoins a residentially used property, except at approved driveways or pedestrian connections. So that's just adjacent to another residential use. So that's not adjacent to the street. That's just adjacent to so if this RV park was proposed next to somebody, that had a house on a lot next to it, they'd have to have a 10-foot landscape buffer on that boundary. But we could add that to buffer streets and highways too, if you wanted to include streets and highways in that.
I think we definitely should at least buffer both. But then the landscaping, we'd have to decide whether really it's just grass or whether we've got, understory trees or overstory trees, or a little more information on what that buffer, because 10 feet of grass isn't really much.
No, so the next section below says, where necessary to screen, the buffer shall include vegetation, an opaque fence or wall, or a combination thereof. So grass would not provide that screening. So they would have to provide vegetation or a fence or a wall or some sort of combination.
But then we have to make sure that the wall isn't 20 feet tall.
I think we have height restrictions on fencing.
But it's
Don't currently.
it's 48 inches.
Oh, that's in front. Side,
Yeah,
side
maybe
fence is 6 feet, 6 feet.
Yeah.
Well, I was just envisioning that wall,
Behind the Alpine.
yeah.
Well, yeah,
between
any
trailer court.
fencing would have to follow the rest of the district requirements for fencing. So if it's 6 feet,
Your complaint.
48 inches, even if it's 6 feet.
So, let me ask Jeremy, would it be ridiculous to have a 25-foot buffer around the entire perimeter? And then within that buffer, you get the option of 10-foot fence and or 10-foot wide landscaping with understory trees? Because, I mean, I don't necessarily mind having a fenced area if that might be more cost efficient and they could do it to where it looks nice, or, again, as long as it's 10 foot and not a prison wall. But then also a 10-foot wide landscape space, as long as there's some trees in there, I think that would look really good. But I think across the board, one of the biggest discussions we've had with this is it gonna be unsightly when you roll up and you just see a flat land with a bunch of RVs, and that's not the intent. Like, I think, and if I were camping in that space too, I would like some trees, some shade, and some green space. That's the whole point of being in the camper. So I think if you're creating it more of a park space, that could be a win for everyone.
Because this could be in our community entrance, so people coming into Red Lodge, we don't want them just to see 10 feet of whatever and then RVs all the way up to the bench. There's got to be some way to mediate that visual.
Again, I don't necessarily hate a fence, just like
Well,
that fence.
but the prison wall was,
Yeah, again, 10-foot
appropriate.
fence seems appropriate.
Yeah, you need a berm or some sort of,
Yeah.
the 25 upper on the sides isn't a bad idea, especially if you're gonna have trees.
Yeah.
'Cause you can't,
so
and our, 10 feet tall?
the average
Yeah, it could be
probably closer
bigger.
to 12.
Yeah,
10 or 12, so 10 or 12 is what we're kind of looking at for a fence.
and if you see the top of the RV, it's not gonna hurt anyone's feelings, like. Just, again, and so again, a 10-foot fence, I think that's appropriate, and having some trees in the space to block the view, because, again, want it to be done right, and be efficient for the folks that are doing it, but also attractive for the folks that are seeing it, and
so
I think.
I guess based on your conversation, I have changed it, say a landscaped perimeter buffer not less than 10 feet in width around all perimeter boundaries, except at approved driveways and pedestrian connections. And then under
Yeah.
B, I changed this, says the landscape buffer shall include vegetation. You want it specifically a 10-foot fence or wall?
So what I'm saying is either landscaped or a fence. So again, like if it's me on the backside and it's up against the bench, like landscaping is fine, but if it's up in the front and you wanna just be able to block that off, and I don't know.
Or
I don't think it has to be
combination.
both.
Well,
I think it
so
can
the way-
be either.
So the way I have it written is that the landscape buffer shall include vegetation, a 10-foot fence, 10-foot opaque fence or wall, or a combination thereof.
Yeah, as long as it's, again, we're not trying to make the fence mandatory, it's an option. It's just one way to
Yeah.
do a block, whether you wanna have it blocked with the fence or with trees, one or the other.
And then
And
we
then
do
you have
also
little
have,
fences.
then we also have the section that says existing mature vegetation may be credited towards required screening.
For,
Yeah, perfect.
I'm just trying to envision a 10-foot wall coming into the city. I mean, we already have rules that there can't be a complete wall without any
Sight
breaks
lines, yeah.
in the wall. So a solid 10-foot wall with a break for the driveway.
Some trees in the front, but I think more so that 25-foot perimeter, having that
Back further,
back, and that's it, and that's something that you can put into the community entrance overlay.
because we
where-
talked about,
Which we talked about, having
getting
access
it back.
off Main Street. So it's not a 10-foot wall like right there off 212, 'cause that would be a problem for a lot of reasons. It's more so you have a 25-foot perimeter of nothing, and then you get into the campground on the inside,
right,
and then up as you're pulling in, there could be a fence line that kind of help block some of that off. And frankly, if I'm in the campground, it'd be nice for sound.
Yeah, from the highway.
So again, it was just a thought. I'm not trying to get us too in the weeds on it, but I do want to make sure that we have some weeds on it just to block this thing.
I think Sandy raises a good point, though. We need to, the places that we're gonna allow the RVs park is in our community entrances. And so the main thing about our community entrances, we want to maintain them as attractive. To me, you know, focusing more on vegetation for screening is more in line with maintaining the attractiveness and the openness of our community entrances. I think, so that's kind of what my thoughts are anyway.
If I remember right, it was only, it's a conditional use in C3 North, and I don't think it was even in C3 South, but.
I think it makes sense in C3 South more.
Well, yeah, when we go back and re-examine that, but, you know, I think we could, as a condition, require a landscaping plan for our review. And, you know, you're gonna give them guidelines, but we still have the ability to say this is not what we have in mind.
I mean, because we could have the vegetation with a fence behind it,
Right,
That's what my thought
but
is.
not the fence without the vegetation. So
yeah.
I think that it's really important that the vegetation
Mhm.
be it be visible from the front.
Yeah, well, I think we required vegetation for the one by, Alpine Lodge.
No, they just put that fence up.
No, I'm not between
Oh.
there in the dome house,
yeah.
but the one on the street, I thought we required vegetation for
So
that.
maybe instead it's just vegetation, remove the fence, but fence is still an option if they want to have a 10-foot barrier fence, like around the backside perimeters, not the front. I'm cool with it either way, I just think that having that space is good, and having vegetation is even better. And I just,
Well,
one of the concerns.
I'll point out too that they're required as part of this, the application requirements to provide a landscaping, screening, fencing, and buffer plan as part of their plan. So they have to provide that for your review, so.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, the way you have this worded under the landscaping, that landscaping section, landscaping perimeter buffer not less than 10 feet in width all around. Well, a fence and a wall is not 10 feet wide. So I think in that requirement, you're basically telling them that you need to have a 10-foot wide vegetation buffer. You can supplement that with a fence, but for the screening purposes. So if they wanted to have some lower understory type bushes or something in conjunction with a fence, they could do that. Or they could do the larger vegetation screening without a fence. You know, basically we're telling them they have to do some combination. They could either provide all vegetation or they have to do a fence and vegetation essentially.
I like it, okay.
Yeah,
That makes sense to me, thank you.
but not just a wall.
Not just a wall and not required to have both. That's the big one for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that makes sense. I like it. Okay. I feel better. Definitely break that down and break myself.
Okay, the next section, we basically just line out some requirements for the RV spaces themselves and parking. Durable all-weather surface, such as gravel, asphalt, or concrete. At least one parking space should be provided within the RV space for the towing vehicle or a personal vehicle. Like in the case of like a motorhome, you know, a lot of those pull behind a personal vehicle for driving around. So, you know, they have to provide enough room for parking that. And then any guest or overflow employee parking shall be provided as demonstrated necessary through site plan review. So, I mean, we would just review that, I think, against the parking requirements of the district. So any office spaces, for instance, or number of employees that they're proposing, you know, we would review parking, employee parking and stuff. as part of that site plan review. Any questions on that? Okay, on internal circulation, emergency access, basically did the same thing as the manufactured home section. Essentially, all the road widths, grades, radiuses, all those things, surfacing have to meet adopted fire code requirements. Also, roads shall accommodate the safe movement, backing, turning, placement, and removal of our RVs. So they'll have to demonstrate that as part of their site plan. And then I also put in the same requirement for RV parks as I did for manufactured housing, meaning for a number of ingress and egresses. So five spaces or less, 1 is required, 6 or more spaces, 2 are required. A minimum of 2 are required. And then we do have a section on pedestrian routes. Shall connect RV spaces with restrooms, service buildings, recreation areas, all those other things. Any questions on that?
I have one question when it comes to the highways in terms of the egress and ingress points. Are there restrictions? I know in the past I've heard of restrictions in terms of how many spaces and how many inlets they're going to allow on that highway space. Will that contradict these rules?
MDT.
That's going to be the applicant's responsibility to work through that with MDT. That because they'll have to provide an approach permit. So if it accesses off the state highway, part of the plan will be approach permits from MDT before they're before any building on the lot, right, or something. Before they can develop the site, they'll have to provide those approach permits from MDT.
So I feel like this was an issue we had with Alpine Basin, and I'm not trying to, this is not the same as Alpine Basin, but the ingress and the egress is a problem to where they weren't permitted, they weren't allowed to put those.
Secondary.
An additional ingress.
And so is that something that we're willing to make a compromise on, or is that something that's just gonna eliminate all of this from happening at all anyhow? 'Cause
I
that would
mean,
be a real,
in my opinion, it would be if they don't, if they can't provide 2 forms of ingress and egress, then they'd be limited to 5 RV spaces. If they can provide the 2 forms of ingress and egress, then they can do more than 5. That's the way this is written, essentially. And again, I point to the fact that previously this was under subdivision regulations, and if this was still under subdivision rules, that's the rule. So they would have had to comply with this as part of subdivision regulations anyways, as part of a subdivision. We just basically are moving what the subdivision requirements were to the zoning. I'm not saying you have to do it. I'm just saying that's the way I set this up. If you want to change it, you have the ability to change it.
and I just try and bring one question to it. And I do have one other question just to kind of pose to the board, because I could see it coming up if someone did try to do this. Host sites, or one space that's essentially earmarked for a more permanent use. Is that something you see fairly frequently at campgrounds with someone who lives on site?
That manages the campground.
Yeah.
Just a thought, I just, with all those being temporary, and I'm cool with that, like, I also want to just consider, like, are we gonna allow maybe a cabin that is there permanently to put one single family residence, or is it a tiny home or something that's like up to one permanent structure permitted? I don't know, just a thought, just something that might come up.
I think that would not count towards the RV space itself, right? That could be counted as part of the site development as a whole. like, because, you know, a lot of RV parks have office spaces with a bathroom,
Right.
employees, right? They may have a restroom building with showers and stuff like that in it. You know, there's other infrastructure that may go along with an RV park that I think could be allowed. So I think a permanent residence like you're talking about for a host or for the owner that will live there and operate as part of the office space maybe or something, I think that could be allowed. I don't think that's I think that it just depends on the, you know, as long as the underlying zoning allows for that residential use on the lot, then I think that would be permissible.
Cool. I'll make sure that's addressed, not a surprise later.
I think the main point here is that we're trying to regulate the spaces for RVs. So
Yep.
the spaces can't be used for permanent dwellings, but anything outside of the RV spaces would be reviewed differently, more in line with our underlying zoning.
No, the question I have, all through this, we've talked about RV vehicles. But there's RV parks also accommodate tent spaces.
Not all,
Not all.
not all do.
I would have heartburn doing that, I'd say hard-sided would be required. And the only reason I say that is just because of their activity.
Yep.
I don't think, that's regular camping. I don't think we're talking about a campsite.
And yes, there's a lot of RV camps that do that, but I think that we could just say hard-sided required.
My point is, nowhere in this do we say, do we limit it or specify that it's for hard-sided RV vehicles.
Well, one thing I did try to do is underwater wastewater, because there are a lot of RV parks that provide electric only spaces, that provide no services spaces, right? I think based on some comments I think we talked about last meeting, all RV sites, I have a requirement in there, all RV sites shall be designed with water, sewer, and electrical service. I think we want to make sure that anybody that is going to use these sites, I think in my mind, it's more of a sanitation issue than anything else. And I think that we want to make sure that all RV sites have those services. Now, if somebody rents a site and they don't use it, we can't control that, right? But we have to at least make sure, I think, that all the sites provide it. Now, as far as tent camping goes, I mean, those aren't technically spaces. I mean, RV parks sometimes have a common area where they allow tent camping, right? So I don't know. I mean, I suppose we could restrict that in this section somewhere if you didn't want to allow tent camping.
You have it in here, no non-hookup sites are permitted.
Again,
But I don't know that specifically addresses tents or tent camping.
Yeah.
That
That's
addresses
not-
the RV sites, like for where people will pull a camper or a motorhome into, but
Right.
doesn't necessarily address the situation where maybe they are letting people pay $20 to pop a tent up on a common area or something.
We have bears. We want to allow soft-sided in town, other than the stuff on private property that we have no say over.
We have it Doug Brown Field.
Pardon?
So we have it Doug Brown Field.
Mhm.
And we've had bike groups and stuff come through town.
We do it up at the fairgrounds, like.
Yeah, the bike rally.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you can, I mean, that'd be part of the reason you want that 10-foot fence.
That's not tall enough.
Right? But, again, it's just something to chew on. I don't necessarily have an issue.
That's choice of words.
No pun intended. Again, I don't necessarily have an issue with tent sites being permitted, and honestly, I do have a little bit of heartburn over all sites have to have water, sewer, and electrical service. I feel like sanitation would be more so covered within DEQ and DPHS requirements. And I don't necessarily mind them having dry sites, because, I
The
mean,
dump station instead.
it can be a lot of,
And a lot of them have that, where there's a central dump station,
yeah,
that they're not at every single
Right.
site.
That's a substantial investment in infrastructure.
That's a
It's a
lot.
very
it's
expensive.
a lot. So, I mean, I would probably prefer to have that removed. But I am also A-okay with, just for the public health and safety factor of not permitting soft-sided tents. Like, if we're looking at it from strictly a public health and safety standpoint, I think that DEQ and DPHS will do a decent enough job providing the sanitation requirements, but I don't know if they're gonna protect people from getting eaten from bears. And that might be where we come in.
Well, it's 7:25. We should maybe start that conversation, or carry the conversation on next meeting. Is that okay with you, Jeremy?
I am at your beck and call, whatever you guys want to do.
You're the best.
I'm
Jeremy.
hungry. I'm hungry and I need dinner, so I'm okay with stopping here and starting up again next meeting, so.
So our next section is water, wastewater, and utility services. That's where we'll kind of,
Yep, yeah, and
Again.
yep, and that's fine. I can make some minor modifications to this section, to allow, well, basically, we can just say, yeah, I'll work on the wording.
all right. Any written correspondence, staff communication, or updates?
Kirby, do you want to mention the 9th?
Yeah, we, September 9th, we do have a design review, for the landmark building. We'll be on the public hearing for September 9th. That will be in front of the board. I will actually be in Dillon, and I think Connor will actually be in Dillon for the planners conference that week, but I should be able to attend virtually from Dillon that evening, so. And then other than that, on Spires, just a quick update on that. They did provide us responses to our comments, and I resubmitted back additional comments to them last Friday. So we still do not have a sufficient subdivision application.
That's for the landmark building?
No, that's for Spire.
No, that's for
Spires.
Spires subdivision. Landmark
Okay.
building application is deemed complete, and the public hearing is scheduled for September 9th on that.
And what's the location of that building again?
It's next to HCA and backs up to
Oh, where the old,
where the old
Quonset.
Quonset hut was.
okay.
Yep,
On the
yep,
houses
right
or
next to
Oak
the
or
skate
whatever.
park there.
All right. Anything else, Jeremy?
I think that's all I have that I can think of.
Okay, petitions, communications from the audience, and open it up for public comment again. Please come forward, state your name, residence.
Yeah.
I'll be brief because I know it's late. Steve Smith, 517 North Hauser. I have just a comment on duration of stay in RV parks, in this RV parks that are being proposed here. Is what's been discussed really meant to be a source, or RV parks really meant to be a source of affordable housing? There's nothing in this language that I hear from my point of view that prevents that from happening. There's language that says temporary, transient right off the bat, but there is no definition of temporary or transient, and therefore there can be no possible enforcement of temporary or transit. legally, if you tried to tell somebody, well, which you've been here too long, you're no longer temporary, they would say. What's the legal definition of temporary? Because you haven't established one. So it seems to me that where this is, one way that this could be heading is permanent affordable housing. Having said that, I know that KOA, for example, I'm not sure affordable is really valid here because KOA, again, these things may not be a KOA unit because they're not going to provide, maybe they will provide a swimming pool or something, but it's $83 a night to stay at KOA with no limit. So that's $2,500 a month just to park your RV there. And the idea of having a duration defined, not a good idea because we can't police it. It's hard to police. That has not stopped the city from having all kinds of ordinances that can't be policed. Fireworks, coming down 78 as you approach from the west, noise laws would be strictly enforced. And then you got to put up the fireworks sign below that. Is that enforced? Point is, the fact that it's not enforceable has not stopped us from having an ordinance on the books if we ever wanted to pursue action on that regard. And that's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Hope Smith, 517 North Hauser. Last month, the Red Lodge Business Alliance sent a letter to City Council talking about the entrance of town and how it doesn't really reflect our community and that sort of thing. And I'm questioning the fact that there's an RV park. I know the one by Alpine Lodge there. Is it Alpine Lodge? Is that what it's called? Yeah, they have some landscaping, but all you see are trailers. And is that what we want to see when we come into the entrance of our community? Yeah, you're talking about putting a 10-foot high fence, but some of these RVs are, I don't know, really tall. So you're going to see, that's the view that you're going to see. And when you're talking about landscaping, I don't know if you can, I know that they have to apply and that sort of thing and give you a plan, but does grass count, decorative grass? Because the landscaping at Alpine Lodge is not disguising anything there. And if you want to, it needs to be hidden, I think. So, and then I have a quick question, because in talking with people who have trailers and all, is one dump station in town going to be able to handle all these new RV campers that are coming in? And that's a commercial dump station. So do we need to provide a dump station or require it for this RV park? Thanks.
Thanks, Hope. Anybody else? Anybody online?
No one online to comment, Mr. Chair.
All right. I think that brings us to a close. Thanks for coming and listening
And voicing your opinion.
and participating.
Yeah,
Now it's adjourned. You want to adjourn it?
he did.
Oh, I didn't hear it, sorry.
We're adjourned.
Okay.